So we're going to do SDG number 13, climate action, leaving us just 4 to go in this series. Although in fact we did life below water as a first one on Andrew's request, because he's a fisherman. So we'll jump 14 to 15 next. So climate action is quite a combination one, because as you can imagine, all the others are kind of included in climate action. But I had a look at the specifics that it included. And it just helps us to get our heads around what each of the SDGs are, to do them one by one, even though they're all interchangeable and interrelated. But I quite like the title, Take Urgent Action to Combat Climate Change and Its Impacts, which I think you could say that the world is guilty of not doing this at the moment. You know, we're going to miss a lot of the deadlines. But there's not a huge amount we can do about the rest of the world. So we'll focus more on what we can do, which is quite a lot. So just a few pointers as to where we are with the climate crisis. And certainly locally, you know, in the last 12 months, we've seen quite a lot of UK flooding. More rain, ground less able to absorb the rain, building in low floodplains. It's been a major issue. There's also been wildfires this year in Portugal, the Valencia floods, Dubai flooding. Who'd have thought Dubai flooding would be an issue, because it's in the middle of desert. And in fact, the Sahara has flooded for the first time. I think it's partly because the rain falls on land that cannot absorb the rain. And that's a hint for us as well, which we'll come back to. And if we can help our land absorb the rain, we're less likely to get flooding. The heat wave in India was appalling. It really is very hard to support human life when the temperature goes that high and it's humid. And then, of course, very recently, we've had the LA fires, which they have put down partly to climate change. So it's undoubtedly, we have crises. They are here now. We need to do something about it, or it is going to get worse. So what we'll do today, look at what exactly is included in SG 13, progress so far, what we can do to mitigate against them, what we can do to adapt, assuming it hits us, and talk about playing our part, and particularly with a focus on our children and families in the community. So what is climate change? Sometimes people get a bit muddled as to what climate is compared to what weather is. And the only difference is that climate is about long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, whereas the weather is what is it doing today and next week. And that's something that we just need to make sure our colleagues and even the children are aware of. It's considered that human activities have been the main driver of climate change. As you know, and as the fossil fuel companies tried to hide for the last 100 years, it was identified at least 100 years ago that burning all these fossil fuels was going to heat the atmosphere up. And it's been buried and ignored. Unfortunately, we're in record warm periods. Every year seems to be the record warmest. I think we've just had the record warmest temperatures ever in February in the UK. It went up to 19 degrees somewhere in the last week, which is incredibly hot. Last year, the Earth was 1.6 degrees hotter than the average temperature, 19th century. And they've been freaking out about what happens if it goes 1.5 above, you know, in terms of ice melting, glaciers disappearing, water levels rising. So we are here, climate change is here. So what can we do about it? Because what we don't want to do is do nothing and go into our kind of stress mode. I'm just going to admit Charlotte, she's in the waiting room. And that's one of the problems. If we frighten ourselves and our staff and our children about this dreadful state of affairs, then it's very stressful. And then we go into stress reaction, which is, as you know, is flight, freeze, or fight. And that's not helpful, because in that state, you don't actually do too much. So we've got to try and say, yes, we've got climate change. There's a lot we can't control about it, but focus on what we can do. And that will help sustain our mental health and help us actually do something, rather than curling up in a ball and crying. or, fighting everybody that comes in sight, or just running away and ignoring it. So I think it's really important. There is now a lot of study on climate anxiety, and the research is supporting that if we do something, it will really help. And therefore, we need to do something with our colleagues, with our staff, to enable them to do something, to feel better about it, because then they're less likely to fall into this stress pit. Of course, the newer generations, younger people, are even more prone to mental health problems anyway. And it's partly because of this climate change issue hanging over them, not to mention wars and everything else. This is just to put it into context slightly. Climate change is really central in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Lots of things come off this particular SDG. So we're likely to see a little bit of repetition, integration, and certainly links to the other SDGs by looking at this particular goal. And you can see that the subsections of 13.1, 2, 3, and 4, 3, and then the A and B actions linked to these various SDGs, which have been placed around the circle to help you understand the integration. So you may find that helpful. In practical terms, we'll see what more we can do. So just to review, these are the targets, and then there's ways of implementing them as well. Strengthening and resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disaster, and then integrating these change measures into our policies and planning, and building knowledge and capacity so that we know what's going on, so that we can do something about it. And then the targets around implementing the framework convention on climate change. So perhaps that's quite a lot of words, because I think we can actually build the strength and resilience and adaptation ourselves in our own way. And that's what we'll talk about shortly. We have had some success, though. We have seen the cost of renewable energy falling, and the amount of electricity generated has increased significantly. I'm thinking that the British government are looking to be more self-contained, self-sufficient in terms of renewable energy, energy in general, which will help contain the price rises that we've been hit with because of the Ukrainian-Russian war. So one of the problems is that because energy prices are fixed on the market, we're still charged a very high amount unless we can actually use more of our renewable energy ourselves. So it's quite tricky because we're not seeing the benefits as much as we should do, even though we're using all renewable energy in the company. There is a hole there in that if we could use more of our own renewable energy, what we generated off our roofs with our solar panels, and use batteries, then potentially we could save a lot of money, and the cost of batteries has come down quite a lot. So that is something we should be looking at, and I know Sandy's looking at that as part of ESOS, along with other ways of generating more power for ourselves. The EV numbers are growing around the country, and I heard something really interesting actually at the conference I've just been to, in that there are now more EV chargers around, fast chargers, than there are petrol stations. So this old anxiety, range anxiety that all of us in EVs have suffered from, is actually a knowledge lack. If you were actually to know where the chargers are and how to access them, then actually you wouldn't be as anxious about your range. And having just driven my EV up to Liverpool, it was really easy, much easier than it's been in the past. But the service stations are cranking up the prices. It's significantly more expensive than it was 2 years ago to charge in a motorway. So I think there's still an argument for getting long range vehicles if you're going to drive them, any distance. Obviously if we're just looking at the vans that service our nurseries, they're going short distances. We just need to make sure that we're on a plan where we take advantage of the low prices that we can have by generating power on our roofs. And the difference is, 7p per kilowatt if you do it on your roof and you're using a plan, compared to 75p on the motorway service station. So it's definitely not something to be ignored. if we want to invest in more batteries, we've got to make sure that we and as many of our staff as possible are using our cheap generated electricity and not having to use the power, the power supply that you can buy on the service stations. So I was pretty horrified, 7p or 75p. I mean, that is massive. So just to be aware.
Can I ask Cheryl, whilst
Yeah.
we're kind of on a slide about energy, what do the SDGs think about nuclear power? Does that count as planet friendly or not? Some people conflate it, don't they, with renewable energy?
Well, I think the nuclear power is a way of being more self-sufficient in the UK, for example. But there's no doubt that the waste you create with that kind of energy is going to last for millions of years potentially. So I think it's a compromise, as most things are. So I don't think it particularly helps with the SDGs, but it does help with Britain being self-sufficient with their energies, is the short answer. What it doesn't do is generate carbon. So we're not seeing it adding to climate change. We are seeing it adding to ruining the world's the planet, because then we've got to store all that nuclear waste somewhere, and that could cause all kinds of problems down the road. And
I was just wondering what the SDGs thought about it, whether they encourage countries to adopt it or discourage it. Really, it's difficult to know.
And of course the SDGs aren't that specific.
No,
they want us to reduce emissions. Well, nuclear waste does reduce emissions because you haven't got any emissions. But if we're talking about protecting the earth, which we are in 2 months' time, it's definitely not helping with that. And actually neither are batteries. If we're digging up all these precious metals and rare metals to use in our batteries, and then they're not being recycled properly and they're being wasted, then that's also a major problem. But in terms of climate change, nuclear power is better for climate change than fossil fuels. So that's a short-term win, long-term not quite so good. Unfortunately, fossil fuel use is still rising. China is coming through as a real king of sustainable energy, and they're putting in loads and loads and loads of solar, so that's great. But we've still got huge areas of the world that are using fossil fuels more, and we have exceeded the 1.5 degree target already. A bit of a projection thing. Again, it's not particularly a nice projection to share with younger staff, but this is the claim from various statistical people. This is Statistica, the company, and they're saying that they're going to be 3 times as many climate disasters going forward. So, all right for me, I'm in my 60s. I'll be dead in I don't know how many years, not very long. Whereas the children that we look after are going to have to suffer this, and they are going to have to be prepared for this. So how can we prepare our children and our young staff for all these heat waves, droughts, crop failures, floods, wildfires? I mean, it's certainly not looking great. I quite like the example here because I was born in 1960. So for my grandchildren who are being born now, this is what they're going to face, and it's it's really grim. It's just trying to get the balance of not frightening people with doing something about it so that they don't just run away. The birth rate's falling. That'll partly be because of fear of climate change. We don't want to make that any worse. So there's the reference for that, for this particular evidence as well.
Sorry, Cheryl, you made a comment there that I'm going to just ask, is there factual evidence behind? You're saying that the birth rate is falling because people are worried about climate change?
One of the reasons.
One of the reasons.
Yeah, another reason obviously is the lack of funding for parents in this country.
I was going to say, I think national. I understood that worldwide the biggest reason for birth rate falling worldwide was more just the inertia of people wanting that sort of life.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was in Sweden last year, Denmark, and their birth rates are rising. But they really look after their parents. You know, they make sure that childcare is properly funded. They make sure that parents' employment rights are protected. They don't lose, you know, in career prospects or financially by having children.
No,
but everyone looks after children. I'm
sure I read an article once that when you look at all the social media stuff that's out there, and these lifestyles, these influencers that have these unobtainable lifestyles for the majority, and you'll see that none of those generally have children. And obviously, and a lot of them are just sitting in their rooms recording stuff as well. And that's how a lot of the younger generation think that their lives are going to be in there for, or want to be in there for. They're not having children on that basis.
I wouldn't be at all surprised, Andrew. I haven't seen the research on the effect of social media, but certainly I think that's what they're experiencing in Japan, aren't they? They're having their relationships on social media and not having children. Their birth rate's been on the decline for 20 or more years.
Yeah.
So it's serious stuff. Meanwhile, Africa are still producing many more babies than elsewhere. So the population is still due to go up, even though locally it's going down. Nevertheless, our poor children and other people's children are going to have to suffer climate change and 3 times as much as we've had to. And that's a lot when you think about what we're putting up with at the moment. So the first thing we want to try and do is mitigate. And then the second thing is adapt. Now, mitigation is where we actually try and stop it happening. So we can stop climate change happening by reducing consumption, by everybody reducing consumption. That's obviously more difficult than it sounds, but I've noticed that the younger generation are doing very much better in terms of buying secondhand clothes, buying their stuff from charity shops, recycling, upcycling. There's certainly a change beginning to come through, which I'm sure is going to hit the retailers if it hasn't already. Encouraging plant-based diets, that's something that we can do with our children. Restoring nature, that's something we're working on, I think, in the nurseries, trying to not put so much plastic grass down, but to have planting areas, wildflowers, looking after the bugs and the bees and the birds, and learning about those things. Because if children don't learn about those things, then how can we expect them to care about them? And if they can't identify a robin and a seagull, then, or an owl, then, you know, why would they know that they're precious? And same with bees and bugs. So we've got a huge part to play in bringing up this new generation to value nature, all sorts of nature, and to respect nature. Humans at the moment think we're kind of godlike, and we control as much as we can, and we put things in place where we haven't actually worked out what the impact of that is going to be. And that's why now places like New Zealand don't allow any non-Indigenous plants and critters to come in, because they're frightened about nature being upset. And we're certainly seeing that worldwide. And it's very difficult to just restore nature. You know, what do we know? There's a lot more we don't know than we actually do know. So we're having to do what little bits we can do in our nurseries and through our training to restore nature, when actually our basic training did not include anything really about nature. You know, we did a bit of biology at school potentially, but nursery staff don't have a big module on nature, do they? So we're trying to kind of do it in retrospect for all the people that were trained in the past. And then Aspire now, Shoots is trying to put that in now and include it in the training for nursery staff now, which is great. We can do a little bit of food growing for ourselves, but we can't escape the fact that the most food growing is going to be by the professional farmers doing it, you know, en masse. But I can certainly see a stage where we're going to be growing more food, perhaps in our attics and on our roofs, and certainly in the gardens, and learning about food growing with the children, with our colleagues. So that is part of them as they go forward. Even things like growing salad for lunches in the rooms, and mushrooms. There are ways of doing it very easily now, and it's up to us to try and do that rather and not import blueberries from Peru. because that's, you know, so expensive on carbon, having it flown all the way here and so on. There has to be some compromise, you know, and I think it's up to us and up to the individuals to decide on what we're going to compromise on. And in the case of food, to work with our chefs so that they can make the best decisions possible, and predominantly try and source locally, and source food that's been grown by people who are aware of the impact of that growth. So, for example, not using fertilizer that's been made using fossil fuels, which does happen, or chemicals that throw out the water supply, because those fertilizers get into the water then becomes polluted, and then we've got a water problem. So it's complex, but it is going to be part of many people's jobs going forward. There's a whole green economy of jobs in the future, and it may well be that some of our 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, given some enthusiasm about food growing, farming, and water use, will be the sustainable farmers of the future. So we have a vital role to play, and we just need to encourage ourselves and our colleagues to learn about these things, and that will help to mitigate both now and in the long term. The other thing we can do is to try and embed sustainability into everything that we do, all our decisions, all our job descriptions, everything. And we are doing that, but I'm sure we can take that a bit further. Unfortunately, Ofsted does not grade us on sustainability, so it takes us away from the focus, away from what we need to be doing to get outstanding Ofsted. So I guess it's up to operations to decide whether they're going to, you know, whether they're going to do that. What are they going to focus on? My preference is that we do focus on sustainability along with all our other Ofsted obligations, and hope to train Ofsted to start inspecting on sustainability as well. And that's certainly the way we're trying to move with the Department for Education at the moment. But meanwhile, it does take us at a slight tangent. And I think that's a challenge. You know, there's a conflict there between time and effort we spend on teaching children to grow cress in the classroom, compared to the other things that, you know, we must do for Ofsted. So there's no easy solution, but I think we do need to do what we can. So that's the type of mitigations. But how can we play our part further in this? Well, we've already risk assessed each potential disaster. We've done it a bit. We've done it at board level. What we haven't really done is cascaded it down to our colleague teams and talked about it in more detail. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that by talking about things, we can understand things better, and we can encourage innovation and new ideas. And, you know, people can get on board with doing things that perhaps we wouldn't have thought of before. You know, more brains is more powerful than 1 or 2 brains. So although we've only got 4 people on the meeting at the moment, if we can cascade talking about these disasters with our teams, then I'm sure we can work out some effective plans and improve all our action plans. And it will also help us be brave in terms of climate. And you know, because we don't want to get into that anxiety mode about being worried about these things. So what I've done is I've looked at some of the disasters and got a list here of the main ones. And if you can think of any others, please don't hesitate to add them in. Heat waves, I'm going to talk about in a minute, and invite you to think about heat waves in a minute, because I'm pretty sure we're going to have a heat wave this summer. So anything we can do to prepare for that's got to be good news. We can also talk about droughts, crop failures, floods, fires, and high winds. I'm not proposing to do those discussions today in this format, but I would encourage you to see if you can spend some time in some meetings over the next few years on each of those subjects, and then come back and revisit them, and, you know, just talk about, well, what can we do if we can assume we're going to have a drought, you know, later this year? What can we do to prepare for it? What can we do to help avoid having a drought? And those kinds of things. So those are the list, and we'll just have a look at heat waves now, just to kind of get us into the mood. So I had to think about how we adapt to heat waves in the nurseries, and I'm sure you'll have some really good ideas as well. these are not my ideas. These are ideas actually that we've already been doing in some of the nurseries, and we're just going to have to talk about them with our colleagues, and also in the offices, to see what we can do to make more of these. So, for example, this first one I jotted down was avoid working and playing in the midday sun. Now, obviously, at the moment, we have lunch at midday in the nurseries at 12 o'clock. So the children are generally outside having their lunch unless they've got some shade and they do decide to have a picnic lunch. But how about in the offices? You know, are we working through that intensely hot period? If you think about if we lived in Spain, would we be working at 12, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the middle of the day? Or would we have a 2-hour lunch break and then come back and work later? Is there an argument for more flexibility in our timetables? You know, in the past, we've said, well, everyone gets half an hour paid lunch. Yeah, no, it's unpaid lunch, but they actually have to have a break for their half an hour. I think by law, it has to be 20 minutes. And they can go and do whatever it is they want to do. Should we think about that? I'm not suggesting we immediately, you know, make a change in our people policy, but what I am suggesting is you go and talk about it. Should we encourage longer breaks? How can we do that? What are the repercussions of doing that?
Just from my point of view,
yeah,
I know it's difficult because you need the society change as well.
Yeah.
Across the board, and it's not something that a nursery could lead. It's something that a nursery would react to, because obviously we're here for the parents' needs, and if the parents, for example, if they for some reason could pull their children out of those hours, then obviously that makes it easier. But if they leave those children in for that whole time, then we're going to have to you're going to staff up more.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, a lot of our children do have a nap after lunch.
Yeah, but you still got to have the ratios while they're napping, don't you?
Well, yes, you do have to have ratios.
So if you're going to give longer breaks,
yeah,
okay, you're going to have to increase the head count. And if you increase the head count, obviously everything goes up in cost. If you increase the break, so let's just say you give everybody, if you gave somebody a 2-hour lunch break, okay, but then they work through the extra hour on at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to schedule where you're then covering that 2-hour person in the middle of the day.
Yeah, it would be. That doesn't mean it's impossible, because actually we've already done that. We've already moved to half an hour breaks, you know, a number of years ago. So, and we do have some staff who have longer breaks, and we do have staff who leave at midday or 1 o'clock. And we could do that, so it could actually be cost neutral, because you wouldn't pay them while they're sleeping, and they either wouldn't be there, or where would they sleep? Does that mean we have to have some chaise lounges in the shade outside? Or does that mean fans in the staff room and you know, the sofa bed? I don't have the answers to that, but I think this is the way we might be moving. You know, unless we can make our buildings cooler in the middle of the day, I think it's going to be tougher for staff to work all the way through that with just a half an hour break. But let them talk about it. You know, let them talk. Perhaps they can come up with some ideas. Perhaps they can take it in turns to have a longer break. And in the office, of course, you can have as long a break as you like, because you can just start again later and work into the evening, which is what the Spanish do. And the French often do that as well. So I'm just saying we need to have an open mind as to how we and how our teams could adapt to this. I mean, I'm very lucky. I work from home. If I want to have a nap at lunchtime, I do. And you know, that's possible. That's not to say I often do, but it's possible. And you certainly do hear about, you know, very busy people having a power nap for 20 minutes and feeling much better for it. So there's opportunity there. And although we don't lead society, if we offer something like, you know, longer lunch breaks so people can rest up in the middle of the day, it might make recruitment easier, for example. We could lead the sector in this, couldn't we? If we wanted to. We lead the sector in lots of other things. We do rock the boat. We could rock the boat here. So I think put it out to staff and ask them, you know, what do you want to do about avoiding working in the midday sun? What can we do? Do we need to have more awnings in the garden? Do we need to grow more stuff? Do we need to have waterfalls in the garden to keep it cool? What do we need to grow down the outside of the building to keep it cool? What about uniform? Do we really need to wear something dark? Can we wear, we're saying black trousers for everyone. Why? How about we move into white? I know that'll get dirty very quickly, but let them think about it. What would they like to do? Imagine you're working in a nursery and it's in the Sahara Desert. How would it be different? Therefore, how can we prepare for nursery work in this country when it's much hotter?
We already relax the uniform, don't we, in the summer to allow them to wear lighter clothes? And
we do.
It could be things like providing more hats, and like you said, all the actual outside area. Have we got enough shaded areas for them to kind of work comfortably? And I absolutely agree, to be able to give the opportunity to staff to have longer breaks if they want to would be amazing. But I think only this week when I was talking to a group of managers, they really do struggle at the moment just to cover that half-an-hour lunch break. So we need to think about sorting it out now in order to then extend it further if they wanted to have a longer lunch break. So yeah, I'm not saying we can't do it, but it's just there's things we've got to sort out now to embed that, to enable people to take that longer lunch break in the future.
Yeah, or the shift changes at lunchtime.
Yeah,
would need to be such that people could do that.
Yeah.
So there's a few ideas there. Sunblock is also a challenge because there are chemicals in sunblock that can be toxic, and it goes through the skin. So what we obviously don't want to have an issue of skin cancer. We obviously do want to make sure our children don't get sunburnt while they're still getting vitamin D. But should it be a cream sunblock, or should it be like clothes that's protecting their skin and hats and shade, rather than risking them being burnt? Hydration's critical. And again, what should we do ahead to make sure we've got water for children outside? I've often seen reports about children not getting sufficient access to water inside buildings. And that's one of the issues for Ofsted as well. If there's inadequate reminders to children to drink and access inside, that's an issue. But should we be thinking more about it outside? There are various ways of providing, safe water to children outside. Lots of water play, ice play, salads, jelly, and ice cream. But can you think of anything else that we could do to adapt to heat waves?
We have got a programme for the gardens this year, if we can still afford to do it, fingers crossed, with gardeners, a gardener for each region, but also splash zones in each nursery as well. So there'll be lots of opportunities to play in the water year round, and that's recirculating. So that's not such an issue. But yeah, I think one of the things we really lack in our gardens is shaded areas. And I think maybe we need to
them in the past. We do need them now, and we're going to need them more. Think about the next 10, 20 years. We are going to need more shade in our gardens, but it's also going to have to be windproof. Although, I thought the wind had increased last year, and I was proved by the facts that was not the case. That was just a perception rather than a fact. So I thought that was interesting.
It's very, very hot though. We could just have sort of sail shades, really good quality sail shades or tarpaulins, and do outdoor sleeping and teaching.
Absolutely.
To keep the children cool. So
yeah. And think about, how we can tunnel wind through, what's the predominant wind direction? What can we do to maximize that? Do we need to have natural fans and things like that, that increase the wind on, because there's nothing quite like standing in front of a fan when you're really hot. And inside, we've already been working on protection on the glass to stop the heat coming inside, natural ventilation, air conditioners where we have to. And again, that could give us the edge. If we can provide an environment that's lovely and comfortable, when the parents come to have a look around the nursery, they're going to be more impressed with, at least my child will be comfortable and safe temperature-wise during the day, because small children are so vulnerable to high temperatures, it kills them. So I've read about one this last week where a child was kept out on a boat in very hot temperatures. Very small child. Parent had 2 other children. The child died from heat exhaustion. So that is an extreme, but I think it'll mean the parents are increasingly aware that we need to try and keep their children cool, and staff need to be reasonably cool in order to function well. So Yeah, I think it's time to start thinking about it, but let them come up with the ideas too. And anyone that's been on holiday in a hot country, you know, we need to use their, or has perhaps been brought up in a hot country, we need to use their expertise. I did notice, I mean, I've just come back from a hot country where it was 30 degrees and really humid. And actually our bodies do adapt after a while. I think one of the problems in England is that we'll suddenly get 30 degrees for 4 days and then that's it. And that does make it much, much harder. There are lots of design elements around heat. And I think this is potentially important when we've got new places that we're building. We can learn from others. So if we ever have a new build, and I know we're talking about having eco sheds and things in various gardens, that we're talking about one now. If it hasn't already been discussed, we need to talk about how those sheds, eco buildings, are going to adapt to this heat that we're going to expect. And there are some ideas here, you know, about thermal vents. You know, some conservatories have vents in the roof, so you can, because hot air rises, and you can open the vent so the hot air goes out the top. Well, perhaps that's something that we should embed in our plans for new buildings. I know one of our nurseries, I think it's Havant's, got a roof like this anyway, and Lakeside's also got a vent, and Parkstone's got a vent. So we already have some, but it's definitely something to think about and to learn about. You know, what can we do to increase ventilation? It's also good for anti-COVID and things like that. So there are a few ideas there about vents and shades and angles that the sun hits and storing hot water and all kinds of things. It is something that's beyond what we do day to day, but we are, again, it can give us the edge if we start thinking about it before it gets critical. I love the Hobbit one. They've got thick grass on the roof, and it's, you know, underground is a little bit underground is cooler, but if it's deep underground, then it's actually hotter. So it's quite complex engineering job. Some basics on hot weather gardening: don't water grass. I don't know if you've ever noticed the grass in hot countries. It does not look like the grass in England. It's a very different creature. You know, the leaves are much bigger. It feels more like a succulent than it does the grass that we have in this country. So we also need to think about what type of grass, if we're going to have grass. I'm sure you all know you don't water plants in the midday sun, because the water magnifies the sun's rays and actually burns the plants. It's like putting magnifiers on them. But don't dig soil up was one I really only learned recently. A soil that's not been dug up, and in fact, even better if you add compost and stuff to it, absorbs water when it rains heavily. And that's what we want, don't we? We don't want rain to bounce off the plastic grass and then flood the building, or bounce off the concrete that we've got in the drive and flood the building. So we need to think about what surfaces we have around a nursery that A, can cope with hot weather, but also can cope with a lot of rain that falls fast. How can we do that? And I also didn't know that if you don't water plants every day, you know, you do them irregularly, they go deeper, and that's what we want. We want them to go deep into the soil, because that makes the soil more absorbent and the plant more resilient. But you know, who would have thought that? So we've done a little bit on heat waves. I'm not going to do the others because it will take us far too long. But I think heat waves you could do again several times with different staff groups. I'm hoping you know, the staff council could take on something like this, and then maybe take the subjects back to their teams, because this climate change is happening now. So we do need to do something about it now. And the better prepared we are and the more involved they are, I think the better we'll all do from it.
Yeah, we've got it as an agenda item every council meeting, Cheryl, and Sandy's on the committee now as well, so that really helps get the message across. Did a really good B Corp presentation, didn't you, Sandy, at the last meeting? And I've already made a note to think about actually how we can keep our staff cool and any ideas they've got for the summer, so we can add that to our next council meeting, can't we, Sandy?
Yeah, that'd be great. And one thing I didn't mention there is fans. You know, you can make hand fans. We can teach the children how to make hand fans, and you can make them out of natural materials. I had a lovely one made out of palm fronds in Fiji, and you just, you know, do this to your face, and it just makes all the difference. One of my kids gets really hot, and he has a little electric fan that he just holds over himself. So all we need to do then is make sure that the batteries are rechargeable batteries. So, you know, there are going to be lots more ideas, hopefully better and great ideas from our colleagues. And it's just a question of harnessing those and then sharing them, and making something of it, saying, you know, we're prepared for this. This is what we're gonna have planned. You know, we're ready, and we're gonna have the resources for making all these fans for ourselves. We're gonna grow palms in our garden, so we've got the palm leaves ourselves, all that kind of stuff. It's quite exciting, actually, and quite fun, and I think could engage everybody in the activity, and then potentially with parents as well. So we've already got risk assessments in place, haven't we, for the main climate disasters? But they've only really been talked about at board level. And we do have action plans in place. I just think it would benefit from spreading it wider, and engaging more young brains for it. We've already got the ESOS report, and that evidences what we've done already and gives us ideas for what to do in the future. And certainly from my perspective, well, I would just encourage us to do that. I know, you know, we've got to pay staff first and those kinds of things, but if we do get any spare money to invest, then this is one of the places I put it, because I think it will help us be resilient in the future. And the future will come quicker than you think. Believe me, after 35 years in this business, it just comes and hits you ever so quickly. And we just need to review, when we look at our policies and procedures, just have an idea as to, you know, what's changed in terms of knowledge about sustainability. What can we put in to those policies? You know, usually we put stuff that we've learned, you know, Ofsted have put something new out, or the government's put something new out. We need to look at what there is on sustainability that we can include in our policies and procedures. And we are ahead of the game. We can't wait for the government or society in general to do this first, because they're not going to. You know, history has taught me that they're not going to. So we can do this, and we can use it as an edge as well. You know, we can use it as to say, right, we have thought about this, and we're ready for this, just like we were with our electric cars when there was a fuel shortage. You know, we can do this. So any other ideas from you as to how we might engage staff on this journey? You know, anything else you think is fundamental? I just wanted to engage your brains. Charlotte's already come up with quite a few good ideas. Maybe operations can do something in the nurseries. How trained are our gardeners? You know, is there anything we can do to support the gardeners?
Well, they don't exist yet, so they're not trained at all. Yeah, I mean, certainly, we want the gardeners to do more than just cut the grass. We're kind of hoping that they'll have enough time to be able to actually work with the children to do teaching around the gardens. So I think that will be a significant step forward. All of our investment this year is focused outside the nurseries. Yeah. So I think, you know, that we know parents want that, and we know children love that. Yeah. So and I think I think once you get those resources out there and that way for children to play and learn, that's when the staff kind of get engaged and excited with it.
Yeah. That's what
So we're hoping that our gardeners, when we get them, will actually start interacting with the children, you know, helping them to grow things. We've specified in our garden pack that there should be a place to grow things in every Tops garden. Yeah. So we'll be supplying all of that. I think, you know, it's going to be an exciting year for our outdoor spaces. But yeah, I think that's what the difference is. I think staff get disheartened if they've got a concrete yard and no support from a gardener and no knowledge. It's hard then, isn't it?
You haven't got the tools then, have they?
Yeah. So it is about choosing the right people. And we know our maintenance teams have already had outdoor learning training. So what they can do to support outdoor spaces, and Corey will be leading sort of some major garden projects this year. So yeah, it should start to be good.
Should be very exciting. Then all we need to do is make sure that when we talk about our successes, link it to the SDG 13.
Yes. Yeah.
So those were the kinds of things I was thinking about, discussing as we've been talking about, improving our policies and procedures, trying to make time to reflect. And I think this is incredibly hard, because we're all so pressurized with so many jobs to do, tight deadlines, particularly our managers, RMs. How can we give them time to reflect on sustainability? That's huge, but without that time, then they can't really make sense of what they've got to do, and they need that as well as the tools. We've got to try and improve our knowledge of what is a sustainable choice and what isn't. And I don't know the best way of doing that. I try and do it myself. Obviously, some of us do as well. But it's a big area, and I think realistically, people may well be specialists. So as you said, if the gardeners can take the lead on the gardening bit, perhaps we should be engaging with our health and safety people to take a lead on the temperature that staff and children are working at. I don't know. I think if everybody looks at it from their perspective, that's probably the safest way to get a broader thing on it. And also, the more diverse our staff are, and what countries they were born in and what conditions they grew up in, we might have the opportunity to learn from our staff. We've got a lot of South African staff. South Africa is hotter than England. So it might well be that they've got some really helpful tips for us. Are we making the most of our diversity? I think there's lots of space for us to be role modeling to colleagues. I'm a particularly poor gardener, so one of my aims myself is to learn a bit more about that. I grew up in Hong Kong, didn't have a garden, I had a balcony, and that's a pretty poor excuse when you're in your 60s. So I think there is space there, but do we all have to role model everything? I don't think we do. I think we can role model the bits that we are more passionate about, the bits that we're better at, and just try and continue to give a little bit of space to learning about that, and then role modeling that, and then using marketing and communication to make sure that we're letting everybody know what we're doing. Do believe we need to use data. Like I was saying, I was wrong about the wind last year. That was just my perception, and it was wrong. So there's no point making decisions on duff data, and I'm sure we're all aware of that. But sometimes you need to actually go and look for it to correct yourself. And fantastic, we've had this success with being the best training provider in the country this year. We really need to use that to motivate other people to do it and to make the most of it for our own people. But we're not very good at that. I already mentioned this, get the EOT on board. And then I just wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to suggest any specific ideas or innovations about how we can adapt and mitigate to climate change. Working conditions maybe. So we've got the accounts department. Are they all comfortable working at home? Do we need to think about bulk ordering fans, for example? There's those kinds of things. If everyone goes out and buys a fan, they might end up paying 30% more than if we bought them trade. So should that be included on our electric equipment? We've got a special deal on buying tablets and stuff like that. How about fans? It's just maybe that's a stupid thought, but anyone got anything that they may think would be useful for them that they could then share with colleagues? Window film's another one. Can we help people put window film on their conservatories? Some people are working in conservatories. Like, Charlotte, you're working in a conservatory, aren't you?
I know, it's like a greenhouse in the summer, but yeah, we're hopefully going to get a new roof on it, which will really help. But again,
Well,
it's a cost. Yeah.
when you do though, and if you do the research on it, can you share that? You know, what choice of roof have you made?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
You know, and then we can perhaps share what we've learned, because people will trust, if you make a decision, they'll trust your
Yeah.
decision. They might not
Yeah.
make the same decision, but at least they'll know you're thinking about that.
Yeah. And they might be not as unfortunate as me to be in the conservatory, but yeah, I think fans are a good one. I think that is something we could perhaps look into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of, yeah, that's an adaptation. The window
Yeah.
film's another one. Insulating a roof is another one. I mean, there's lots that can be done. We could even do a little mini project on how to make a conservatory cooler in the summer. In fact, I've got my friends the Borers who are staying with me at the moment. They're just visiting their new bungalow today, and it has a conservatory. So I'll have the same conversation with them.
Yeah. And the opposite
lime.
in the winter, keeping yourself warm in the winter, honestly, it's a challenge. It really is. They're just not very eco-friendly conservatories at all. Yeah. Not good.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a conservatory, but I have had in the past, and so I know the feeling. And don't forget that fan in the roof idea. If you're going to change the roof,
Yes.
have a vent.
Yeah. Have something to let the heat out. Yeah.
You maybe, I mean, the thing is that in England, we're used to English conservatories. So we probably need to be looking at what do conservatories look like when they're, you know, in the south of Spain, or, you know, some other really hot country. Do they have conservatories? And if so, what do they do to make the temperature, you know, work for them? There's lots to be learnt abroad, I think. And you could, you know, encourage anybody that's going abroad in the summer to have a look, see what are the hotels doing about using conservatory space, and can we nick any of their best ideas? But certainly plants, blinds, you know, the window film, hole in the roof, fans. I bet there's other ideas as well. And maybe a solid roof. I know a lot of people are putting solid roofs on.
Yeah, that's what we're hopefully going to go for, a more solid roof.
Yeah, and then you can insulate it as well.
Keeps the heat in, yeah, exactly, and the sun out. Yeah.
Yeah, we swapped our conservatory for one with a solid roof.
There we go.
So, and it's a SIPP, which is the highest spec of insulation that you can get. And it really surprised me, because I thought it was just going to keep it warm in the winter, but how effective insulation is at keeping it cold in the sun.
You don't think about that, do you? You just think about keeping you toasty, don't you, rather than actually keeping yourself cool. Yeah. We're on the very early stages, Sam, so any tips, welcome to hear them.
You know, we have a conservatory in Bearwood, and it's got babies in it.
And
I'd suspect that roof we need to think about
the same issue.
Insulating it.
I think so. I mean, I didn't even think about it till now, and that's the advantage of this kind of discussion.
But insulation is just a winner, isn't it? Because it also saves energy in the winter. You know, we've got to make sure our insulation is up to the top spec for all of climate change, don't we? But
yeah, we do.
We did that, and then we put bifold doors on 2 of the 4 walls. So the 2 of the walls are internal, and then so that we can open up both walls in the summer.
Brilliant.
So, and that gives that shaded, highly insulated, sort of shaded spot to be in.
Yeah, and the wind can come through.
Yeah,
absolutely. There are lots of books you can share with children. So operationally, these are just some of the examples. And there are positive ones around. That's what I really like about some of these books. There is a video. I only found one on SDG 13. I'm sure there are others, and I wasn't overly keen on it. It was very American, and the other thing is that they talked about polar bears falling into the water and dying because their ice melted through. And I just, you know, I've heard of children having nightmares about that sort of thing, so I really don't want that in the nurseries. I mean, that is what's happening, but I just don't think children need to know about suffering. They just need to know the more positive stuff, these small children. And they were also referring to dairy milk quite a lot, which again, I'm quite keen we try and move away from, because again, of the climate impact of cows. But it did talk about recycling and reusing and things, so it had some good things, but I'm not sure I wouldn't recommend it. I think we might have to make our own, you know, and that's something to take back to marketing. Let's make our own video on climate change and what we're doing about it with our children, and make it a really positive, upbeat one that's fun, that we can share with parents. It's just a thought. In terms of the Global South, well, in this particular case, we actually need to learn from them rather than anything else. They've got all kinds of, you know, water distribution systems for outside, so the children can drink outside. And until our OMEP nurseries develop these relationships, this is something for the future, is to talk with them about what we can do and how we can advocate. Bearing in mind that a lot of the funding donations for children have dried up, not just with our government, but with the American government. They've cut funding internationally enormously, to our shame. And it means that, you know, partner nurseries are going to be in more trouble than they are now. And so, just to summarize in our last minute, SDG 13 is climate action. And we've talked a little bit about the predictable disasters and what the risks are and how we can mitigate and adapt to those. We've discussed an action plan really only on one, and we need to take it back to our colleagues, to the children, to the parents, and do stuff that's positive, because that will help us with our own mental health as well. And that's it, unless you've got any other questions. No? Okay, lovely. Thank you all very much. We've got the Gecko meeting coming up next, so I'm going to. Oh, Zoe, you were on the call too. I've only. When I get rid of this presentation, I can see who else is on board, and there are actually 6 of us, not 4. Excellent. So